20,000 people die of cancer every day. This translates to 8 million deaths every year, 500,000 of which are Americans. At the beginning of the last century, 1 person out of 20 would get cancer. In the 1940s, it was 1 out of every 16 people. In the 1970s, 1 person out of 10. Today, 1 person out of 3 gets cancer in the course of their life. Over 1 million Americans are diagnosed with a new cancer every year. All these people suddenly plunge into a dark tunnel that will dramatically change their life for many years to come. Faced with an apparently endless chain of medical tests, examinations, second opinions, medications, new tests, surgical operations, support therapies, and follow-up checks, they find themselves at the complete mercy of the disease. While in that tunnel, each patient feeds an immense medical apparatus that employs hundreds of thousands of people and generates millions and millions of dollars for the medical and pharmaceutical industries. From research laboratories to medical schools, from prevention clinics to worldwide drug sales. Today, the cancer medical apparatus is so large and expensive that it needs its patients in order to survive just as much as the patients need the apparatus.
Cancer is a big business, one of the biggest businesses. The typical cancer patient spends at least $50,000 to treat his or her disease. With 1 million new American cancer patients every year, that translates to $50 billion annually spent on cancer treatment in the United States.
But to modern oncology, cancer still remains a mystery. What a century ago were just wooden contraptions, able to lift only a few feet off the ground, today have become sophisticated jets, capable of reaching incredible heights at 3 times the speed of sound. What a century ago was the creaking sound of the telegraph over some rustling wires, today has become a global network of fiber optics, where millions of people exchange information in all possible directions. What a century ago was still a relatively unknown planet, today has been lit by day and night, and it has been explored to the extent that we can visit it in every longitude and latitude from the comfort of our home. The only thing that has not changed in the last 100 years is the apparent incapacity of medical science to understand and conquer a disease like cancer. Why? The official theory maintains that cancer is a problem that originates in the human cell.
Cancer is a group of over 100 diseases characterized by abnormal, uncontrolled cell growth.
Cancer is a sometimes fatal disease caused by the abnormal growth and division of cells. While normal cells have well-defined walls and nuclei, the uncontrolled growth in cancer cells causes the creation of abnormal, unstructured masses of tissue, known as neoplasms or tumors.
Most cancer-related deaths are due to metastasis, malignant cells that penetrate into the circulatory system and establish colonies in other parts of the body.
How and where the migrating cells stop is different for different cancer types. Once the tumor cells are no longer moving, they can begin the process of forming a new tumor by leaving the blood vessel and beginning to reproduce in the new location. If the new environment is suitable, the newly arrived cell will begin to grow and a new tumor will develop.
This official theory, also called molecular theory, is basically the same that was formulated more than 50 years ago.
Cancer begins as a departure from normal cell growth that is harmful and unceasing. If the abnormal cells grow slowly in a limited area, they are called benign tumors. If the cells are spread to other parts of the body, they constitute a malignant tumor, one that is cancerous. Cells of malignant growths break off and travel through the bloodstream to other parts of the body. There, they may start new cancerous growths.
In the last 50 years, the search for the cause of cancer within the human cell has been pushed beyond the limits of anyone's imagination. Today, the most advanced laboratories are working directly on the human genome in order to identify the genes that seem to be responsible, according to some scientists, for the different kinds of cancer. This opens the door to a dreamlike scenario for the pharmaceutical industry. A world where each patient would need its own personal cure, tailored to its own personal needs. 1 million new patients every year, 1 million new cures for each and every one of them.
What we want to do is we want to match the disease with the cure or palliative treatment, whatever it is, by using the genomic tools. And that's really what the whole cancer world is now going to be about for a very long time.
The question of whether we're going to break the cure barrier is not a question about if, it's a question about when.
In the meantime, however, no one has been able to prove that the official theory is the correct one, and that the origin of cancer is in fact of genetic nature.
Major advances are being made in the detection, prevention, and treatment of cancer. But the mechanisms that trigger malignant cell growth are still not completely understood.
In the meantime, statistics seem only to get worse.
We've lost the war on cancer. Since the 1950s, the outlook for most cancer patients has remained the same, a 1 in 3 chance of living for 5 years after diagnosis using conventional therapies, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, drugs. The fact is that today, 2 out of 3 American cancer patients will be dead before 5 years.
Despite such dismal results, official oncology continues to impose on patients the only 3 therapies that have ever been authorized in the last 100 years: surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy. And 2 of the 3 are actually carcinogenic.
Surgery is the oldest technique and the most successful of the 3. But surgery is useful only when the cancer is localized, a minority of cases. Patients also fear radiation's dangerous side effects. One of these is that radiation can actually cause cancer. The use of radiation remains controversial even in medical circles.
As much as we could work with her, say on a math problem, she was not comprehending it.
It would take a long time to get like a worksheet done.
Parts of Elizabeth's brain weren't there anymore because of the radiation, that it had killed that part of the brain. So the part of the brain that was responsible for memory was gone.
Chemotherapy is designed to kill cancer cells throughout the body. It is highly toxic, however, and it also kills healthy cells. Today, chemotherapy is often given in combination with surgery and radiation.
Your typical chemotherapy agent will certainly cause tiredness. There is a risk of sickness, but there are very good anti-sickness drugs these days that can control that. Chemotherapy frequently causes taste change. It can cause a sore mouth. The first side effect that many people ask about, however, is hair loss.
In fact, many chemotherapy drugs are carcinogenic. Their toxicity is so high that all personnel handling them must observe very strict safety rules. Their disposal calls for total destruction and incineration of anything that comes in contact with them. Some of these drugs remain partially toxic even after incineration beyond 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. But there is something new about chemotherapy that's been emerging of late.
Many women who undergo chemotherapy for breast cancer describe unsettling changes to their memory and concentration. Researchers at the University of Michigan Comprehensive Cancer Center say this phenomenon is very real.
Women have complained of cognitive changes that have occurred during the time that they've been treated for breast cancer for a long time now. And the term chemobrain has been coined, and this is used to describe loss of concentration, difficulty remembering things, having difficulty thinking clearly, and not being able to function effectively in normal activities that the person was able to do perfectly well before they had treatment.
Simple little things. I'd have to wait to think of something, and it would be frustrating.
X is red, C is green.
Researchers say the chemotherapy creates memory problems that can last for years.
Children are also beginning to report long-term effects of chemotherapy drugs.
Things like my homework, like, let's say, like math homework. When it's real noisy, I can't focus. And it just makes me feel like my mind's being erased.
But is there any benefit in chemotherapy?
John Cairns of Harvard University published a study in Scientific American. He found that chemotherapy drugs benefit at most 5%, 1 out of 20 of the cancer patients they're given to.
If conventional therapy has such limited results, why isn't the medical profession willing to investigate alternative approaches?
The answer to this question may be found in some historic events that took place almost a century ago, when official medicine finally managed to gain the upper hand on the so-called empirical doctors, who cured patients with herbs and natural remedies.
In the 1800s, society sanctioned both approaches to healing. Patients had a choice of using either doctors, called allopaths, or natural healers, called empirics or homeopaths. The two groups waged a bitter philosophical debate. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine. They believed the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory. The allopaths used 3 main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humors. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal procedure before anesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathic methods altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure. Competing with the doctors were the empiric healers. Contrary to the doctors, they believed in stimulating the body's own defenses to heal itself. Instead of poisonous minerals, they used vegetable products and non-toxic substances in small quantities. They especially favored herbs, learned from Native American and old European traditions. The empirics said they based their remedies not on theory, but on observation and experience. Satirists of the day added that with empiric treatment, the patient died of the disease, not the cure. And the balance of medical power remained equal until the turn of the century. Then, new medical treatments emerged that were potentially very profitable. The AMA joined with strong financial forces to transform medicine into an industry. The fortunes of Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller financed surgery, radiation, and synthetic drugs. They were to become the economic foundations of the new medical economy.
The takeover of the medical industry was accomplished by the takeover of the medical schools. Well, the people that we're talking about, Rockefeller and Carnegie in particular, came to the picture and said, we will put up money. They offered tremendous amounts of money to the schools that would agree to cooperate with them. The donors said to the schools, we're giving you all this money. Now, would it be too much to ask if we could put some of our people on your board of directors to see that our money is being spent wisely? Almost overnight, all of the major universities received large grants from these sources and also accepted 1, 2, or 3 of these people that I mentioned on their board of directors, and the schools literally were taken over by the financial interests that put up the money. Now, what happened as a result of that is that the schools did receive an infusion of money. They were able to build new buildings. They were able to add expensive equipment to their laboratories. They were able to hire top-notch teachers. But at the same time as doing that, they skewed the whole thing in the direction of pharmaceutical drugs. That was the efficiency in philanthropy. The doctors from that point forward in history would be taught pharmaceutical drugs. All of the great teaching institutions in America were captured by the pharmaceutical interests in this fashion. And it's amazing how little money it really took to do it.
Surgery became viable with anesthesia and infection control, and doctors advocated expensive radical operations. These in turn produced the need for a large, lucrative hospital system. Radium fever swept medicine. The price of radium rose 1,000% almost overnight. Another costly technological industry entered the hospital system. A drug industry grew out of the booming patent medicine business. The doctors changed educational standards and licensing regulations to exclude the empirics. Soon, only AMA-approved doctors could legally practice medicine. In a brief 20 years, the AMA came to dominate medical practice. Organized Medicine launched a media campaign to associate the empirics with quacks. The code word for competition was quackery.
So now the average doctor goes through school, he gets a great education, he has to be really smart to get through it, he learns all about drugs, he doesn't know too much about basic nutrition. I found that the average wife of these physicians knows more about nutrition than he does, but they sure know their drugs. And if you go to your typical doctor today, I don't care what it is, chances are you're going to walk out of there with a prescription. Why? Because that's what he has been trained to do.
The companies that make up the pharmaceutical industry are among the largest corporations in the world. Together, these businesses have come to be known as Big Pharma. In 2004, their combined global sales were over $500 billion, with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson leading the pack. In the U.S., the core of Big Pharma's immense profits is from sales of prescription medication. And since these drugs can only be prescribed by medical professionals, most of the industry's promotional and marketing activities are directed at doctors, pharmacists, and other healthcare providers.
This starts out at the first day of medical school, and in many medical schools, even the incoming students that, are 2 years away from seeing a patient will start to get gifts from the pharmaceutical industry. And as these students get farther along in their medical education, the interactions and the gifts escalate to free lunches, to dinners.
Champagne, brunches, happy hours, New York jet tickets. No matter where you spend the money, you make money. And my boss always told me, don't worry about it. There'll always be more funding. Spend what you can. In fact, if I give you $100,000 to spend, Gene, I want you to spend $200,000.
Before 1980, most clinical research was funded by the National Institutes of Health. During the 90s, most of that research got pulled out of universities and was brought to for-profit research organizations. The problem is that gave virtual complete control over the research to the drug companies. They could design the studies. They have control of data so that many of the authors of the most important articles published in our best journals aren't even allowed to see their own data. They don't get free access to their own data. And they have control over publication.
To sum it all up, the pharmaceutical industry first gained control of the teaching system. Then it gave the AMA the power to exclude all other doctors from practicing. Then it took over the entire drug testing process, while heavily influencing the medical publications that reviewed those drugs. And finally, Big Pharma extended its control over the federal entity that is supposed to verify those drugs' safety and efficacy. At the opposite end are the sick citizens, and in the middle are the doctors who must cure them based on information they can only get from the pharmaceutical industry, which can no longer be verified. Chemotherapy drugs are, in fact, among the most expensive of all. A 1-month supply of erlotinib, a chemotherapy drug produced by Roche, cost $2,300. The same supply of sorafenib, Bayer's chemotherapy drug, costs $5,500. The monthly supply of sunitinib, a chemotherapy drug produced by Pfizer, cost almost $7,000.
The drug industry is the most successful global industry in the world. What they don't want you to do is get better, because if you get better, their market's gone.